Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 11, Managing Conflict. Previously, we've been discussing intercultural communication, how we deal with people who have different beliefs and values and behaviors than us. Then we talked about listening, how we better understand each other. And now we're going to be talking about conflict. And in conflict, this interrelates to those two because when we do not use effective intercultural communication, when we do not listen to other people, then conflict runs rampant. But we can engage in conflict in one of two ways. And even when we do those well, we can even sometimes run into conflict. So we're going to be talking about how to manage conflict effectively instead of letting conflict run wild. So we first have to define what is conflict. Conflict is an expressed struggle between two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals and scarce resources, and interference from the other party in achieving that goal. So let's break that down a little bit. First, it is an expressed struggle, meaning that it all parties should know that there is indeed a conflict. Even when you are avoiding a conflict, you still both know that the dishes are an issue, but th- that but if someone doesn't even know that it's an issue, then it is not conflict. Next, between at least two interdependent people, interdependence is a common part of conflict. Interdependence is the welfare and satisfaction of one person depends on the other person's actions. Let's go back to the dishes, where if the dishes are not done, then I have to see them. If you do not give me a fair amount of the candy, then I am not going to have candy, etc., etc. So we are interdependent on on people for many things. We also have perceived incompatible goals. The conflict looks as if it will, if conflict looks as if one person's gain would be the other person's loss. For example, if let's say that we are having a conflict about who has control of the TV, we can either watch Gossip Girl or we can watch Yu-Gi-Oh! I There are pretty incompatible goals there. However, we can always find middle ground, but that one would be impossible, maybe. Next, perceived scarce resources. When there isn't enough of something to go around, then that is that scarce resource. A good example of this one is that with that TV, where there is only so much time between school and work to have TV. That is a scarce resource, time, and as a result, there is conflict over that. And interference from the other party in achieving that goal. My sister wants to watch Gossip Girl. I want to watch Yu-Gi-Oh! So as a result, that by her watching her program, that will interfere in achieving my goals. So we've defined what conflict is and how, and should we strive to remove conflict from our lives? No. Conflict is inevitable. Inevitability. It is impossible to avoid conflicts, so we should strive to try to handle them effectively and engage in constructive conflict styles instead of destructive conflict styles. Destructive conflict styles use conflict at where it is about defending themselves using evaluative you language. You do this, you do that, you are this, you're being unreasonable. Also, with that last one, low empathy, no real care or understanding of the other person. You are being unreasonable. You just don't understand. Things like that can very much, by showing this lack of empathy, it communicates a lack of value for the other person. And as we know, when we communicate low value for another person, then it creates defensive responses and a toxic communication culture. And with all toxic communication cultures, it results in poor mental health and physical health. That people who engage in destructive conflict styles get sicker than those who do not. So, you should try to be healthy and engage in constructive conflict styles. What are constructive conflict styles? It is healthy. It sees conflict as healthy and that it needs to be faced. Anything that is human is also manageable. Conflict. When we are disagreeing on something, there's one way of going about it where I need to defend myself, so I'm not going to bring it up. Or, you know what, this is a conflict that we both don't want. So let's work on it. Let's work on it together. Perception checking is used to see where my perception is maybe not as accurate as it could be, and be willing to admit mistakes. When we are even willing to admit to a small part of the problem, then it creates reciprocation, where the other person then feels compelled to admit some small part of the problem as well. And when that happens, then it's kicking a ball around. It's working on this problem together instead of I'm trying to beat you and you're trying to beat me. And when I win eventually, because I'm a very good arguer, then you will understand that you are wrong and that you will do what I have told you to do. That's not good for a relationship. Constructive conflict styles result in relational harmony when things are satisfied, but even when a result isn't reached. Let me say that again. When a result is not reached in constructive conflict styles, it can still improve relational harmony. Because I have shown value. I have checked my perceptions. I was willing to admit mistakes, and we are working together on this problem. I've communicated a lot of value of my relational partner. And hopefully they've communicated relational value towards me. So this communication was very confirming, very supportive, and even if we don't reach a solution, it was still worth having this conflict. So now let's talk about the different types of conflict. There is avoidance, accommodation, and competing, compromising, and collaborating. So we are going to go ahead and dive into each of these five with starting off with avoidance. Avoidance shows a low concern for the self and a low concern for the other person. So, what do I mean by concern for people? Concern is very much where we decide which style we should engage with. Because if I have low concern for myself of getting what I want in this situation, and they have low concern for what they want, and I have low concern for them getting what they want, then I may very easily avoid, like a turtle. So, this may be a situation where, for example, the dishes are dirty in the sink and they have been there for weeks. I do not care about the dishes being clean. I do not care that they want the dishes to be clean. So, as a result, I would rather suffer in silence than to confront the problem. Also, this creates some frustration and discomfort in relationships when avoiding is chronic, avoiding those relational issues. This can also have some application like when conflict isn't worth it, or if emotions are out of control. There are some good applications where you should engage in avoiding. A good example of this is, let's say that your older grandparent, says something very, very inappropriate in a family setting. would you approach that conflict? I don't really care enough to bring it up. And you know what? Um, I don't care that she is, saying it how she's saying it. You know what? That's fine. I'll just deal with it. So sometimes that is understandable. But also, when things have gone out of control emotionally, then you may want to take a step back, avoid the situation a little bit, and then eventually come back to it. But that's an important part. An example of this is one time I was dating someone who would not pay for anything. And you know what? I was okay doing it for a little while. But I began to avoid it and avoid it and avoid it. And I would suffer in silence because I didn't want to engage with the problem. And as a result, the relationship was very frustrating and was not so comfortable. And we eventually did break up. So, that was an example of how avoidance can cause some serious issues. Next, we have accommodation. And while accommodation is better, it also can have some downsides. So, this is low concern for the self, high concern for the other person. This is that person who you care about greatly, that you want to help. So, for example, if, you know, my girlfriend is like, you know what, hey, I really want you to join me at this dinner. I don't really mind. I don't want to go, don't want to not go, so I don't really care about what I want. But she wants to do it, so I will definitely accommodate to that. That's totally fine. This is a lose-win. And it's like the teddy bear, trying to be kind. If it is a genuine act of kindness or love, it enhances the relations. But if it is but it is not appreciated when it is taking the role of the martyr, the bitter whiner, or the saboteur. This would, in that same example, and this is not true, but let's say that I didn't want to go, and but I just don't care. I'm like, you know what? Fine. You will go ahead and do what you want. I don't even care. You know what? You always get what you want. That's technically accommodation. They won, I lost. But do I really care? But that is obviously not perceived as that. In fact, it can sort of be perceived as a competitive conflict style of trying to make the other person feel bad. Avoidance and accommodations have meanings that are culturally bound. In collectivistic cultures or low context cultures or high power distance cultures, avoidance and accommodation might be a means of maintaining some of the social hierarchy and to not engage in some issues because conflict can be seen as a relational threat in those sorts of cultures and should therefore be avoided or accommodated too. So that's where intercultural communication can intersect. Next, we jump into competition. Competition is high concern for the self and low concern for the other person. This is the my way example, or like a shark. I like to think of this one as a shark, where it is this one again, an intersection of intercultural communication is very much ingrained within the American culture and can be used to develop a shared narrative around competition. However, it can very easily backfire. Look at how we see business, that it is all about competition. It is beating other people. And while that it can be a good thing at times, it can also backfire. A good example of this is there may be some businesses that are able to work together and do to gain a larger share of the market. So there are benefits of engaging in competition. Each business has to compete and therefore do better. But also, it can also cause some downside. There's two main types of competition or competitive conflict styles, which is passive aggression. This is where the communicator expresses dissatisfaction in a disguised manner. A good example of this, back to the dishes. Let's say that someone, decides to put a note on it, could you please clean these up? That may be, if then that does not get read. Let's say that that then you put all the dishes into the person's bed. Then that can also be seen as this sort of passive aggressiveness. And the goal isn't to really win the argument, it's to make the person crazy and make them feel bad to the point where they will eventually give in. Then we have direct aggression. Direct aggression is attacking the person, the position and dignity of the receiver. This is, well, you're dumb, you're this, you're that. So you can attack the person, or by attacking their position without trying to understand the other person's position. So this is the competitive conflict style. Next, we have compromising conflict style. This is where we find a middle ground, where I have a little bit of concern for myself, but also concern for the other person. This we can settle for compromise when partial satisfaction is the best that can be hoped for. If I feel like I have full claim to this candy bar and you feel like you have full claim to this candy bar, then we can compromise by splitting the candy bar, and that is fine. Let's say that I feel like I have full claim of this baby, and you feel like you have full claim of this baby. We tear the baby in half, right? That obviously compromise sometimes does not work, and sometimes has a not positive, has an unearned positive reputation, because it doesn't take a lot of effort to do, but it also doesn't get both of us exactly what we want. If it's satisfying enough for both parties, then it's better to define it as collaboration as a win-win, and this is what collaboration is. Collaboration is a win-win scenario, and it has high concern for the self, high concern for the other person. When we are talking about communication, in total, if I show high concern for the other person, but also stand firm with how I want things to be, that is incredibly confirming, and as a result, this is one of those ones that we want to strive for, but there are benefits and as well as also detriments. There are win-win scenarios, or problem solving is finding solutions that satisfy the needs of everyone. We should avoid trying to succeed at the partner's expense. Bring them with us. Also, belief that working together will allow both parties to will get what they want without compromise. If we have that belief, collaboration is more likely. If we do not have that belief, then it is unlikely, if not impossible. So, the collaborative collaborative conflict style leads to less aggressive communication and less stress for all parties, but it is a tactic that is becoming more and more rare. So, when we engage in this, when we engage in conflict, our first goal should be trying to find a win-win scenario, because they are out there. It just takes a little bit more creative thinking and problem solving to be able to find those solutions. Collaboration is ideal, but it is very time consuming. Every style has their own application, but that we should strive to find those sorts of situations. So, as you can see, when we have avoiding, low concern for the self, low concern for the other in avoiding, then we will engage in avoiding. If we have high concern for the other person and high concern for the self, we should absolutely be engaging in collaborating. And every single one of these situations has an application, a time when that is going to be the most effective. So, which style should I use? Well, it depends on three big things. First, the situation. Power differences or during a crisis will affect how this happens. A good example is if it is a crisis situation, I may take a competitive conflict style because we need to go. You know what? I'm taking control right now. Be quiet right now. Shut up. We are all going to go. I'll walk very quietly to the stairs and down the stairwells and out of the building. This is the way to go. Everyone follow me. At that point, I am not taking input. I am taking control of the situation, and that might be a situation where that does need to happen. Next, we have power divergences. Differences. Imagine if I am having a conflict with my boss. I'd be less likely to engage in a competitive conflict style. Instead, I'd be maybe more likely to take on an accommodating style or a avoiding style or maybe even a compromising style if the power difference was somewhat lower. Next, we have to also consider the other person. How can you adapt to the style that the partner is using? Is what you should be asking yourself. Because if someone is coming at you with aggression, then you may either want to avoid to let them cool off a little bit, try to work on a collaborating conflict style if you want to try to calm them down by showing value for their perspective, or if it is chronic that they always do that and you are never getting what you want because you're constantly accommodating, then you may want to go to competing. But it all depends on the person who you're interacting with. And lastly, we have goals. When solving a problem, you should be assertive of your goals with a few exceptions. The reason why we do this is because we need to be able to get something from the relationship, something from the communication, and when we don't, that can be a big challenge. So, with that, that concludes this part of chapter 11. Have a lovely rest of your day. I'll see you next time.